Diablo's early access beta has come and gone, and now we're heading into the open beta this weekend, which introduces the Druid. In this video, we are going to cover a few build options available to the Druid. This is one of the two classes I intend to main in Diablo 4, so if you're considering playing a Druid, make sure to subscribe to the channel as I plan on making more Druid content in the future. Now very quickly, let's get into what the Druid is all about. This class primarily focuses on shifting between three different forms: your werebear form, your werewolf form, and your human form. Werebear form focuses on defense, providing a lot of shields, allowing the druid to stick in the middle of the fray while absorbing damage. The werewolf form primarily focuses on quick melee damage and poisoning enemies with plagued claw attacks. Finally, the human form focuses on spellcasting, calling upon storms, and earthbending to deal damage. The druid class mechanic, from my understanding, will not be available in this beta. However, the way it works is as you kill enemies, they have a chance to drop different offerings. You then loot these offerings and give them to 4 different spirit animals. As you get more offerings, you unlock the option to select different passive buffs. You can have 1 buff per spirit animal, so that's a total of 4, with the option to unlock a 5th power once you have unlocked every single other power. Let's get into our first build, which is going to be the Storm Druid. This build focuses on summoning storms, which exposes enemies, applying a vulnerability debuff. This build further enhances the vulnerability effect by increasing your storm damage against those vulnerable enemies. For our basic attack, we're going to be taking Storm Strike, which is a melee attack that does a little bit of cleave damage, and when this is enhanced, it's going to also immobilize or have a chance to immobilize enemies. And for the final perk with Fierce Storm Strike, we're going to have a chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. For spirit skills, these are going to be our main spirit spenders and where a lot of our damage is going to come from. We are going to be taking Lightning Storm. Lightning Storm is a channeled effect, which is going to cost 15 spirit per channel second, and it's going to deal lightning damage in an area around you. And it looks like it's going to be a maximum of 5 seconds for channel duration. And when this is enhanced, the size of your lightning storm is maintained for 4 seconds after channeling. The final perk we're going to be taking is Raging Lightning Storm, which is going to add 1 additional second to the channel time, meaning we get to do 1 additional lightning strike. There are a couple passives in here, which I'm not entirely sure about yet, but we will be taking Heart of the Wild to increase our maximum spirit slightly, but more importantly, we'll take Wild Impulses, which is going to increase your core skill damage by 30% at the expense of it costing 15% more spirit per cast. Moving into our defensive skills, we're going to be taking Cyclone Armor, which is going to apply a passive damage reduction to ranged attacks. But when it's activated, it's going to knock enemies back, and when we enhance it with Enhanced Cyclone Armor, those knocked back enemies are going to be slowed by 40% for 3 seconds. And then for the final perk on Cyclone Armor, we can then apply vulnerability to those enemies that are knocked back by Cyclone Armor's active. We're taking the second defensive buff here with Earthen Bulwark. The reason I'm taking this is because if we're channeling Lightning Storm, this gives us a little a moment to just fully channel, I think. And in addition to that, when we enhance it further, we become unstoppable, meaning that we can't be crowd controlled briefly. And then finally, we would look into taking Preserving Earthen Bulwark, which is going to apply a Fortify effect, which is just extra defensiveness, meaning that it's going to be a little bit safer to channel our lightning storms. For our companions, I kind of played around with the idea of taking ravens, but for now I'm going to bypass taking companions and instead take the Nature's Reach passive effect, which is going to increase the damage we deal by to distant enemies by 9%, and this effect is doubled whenever it's dealing damage to slowed, stunned, or immobilized or knocked back enemies. So really, this should be easy to apply, especially if you're knocking someone back with Cyclone Armor because they're going to be slowed. And then for our Wrath skills, we're going to be taking Hurricane, which is summoning a massive storm that follows the druid around for 8 seconds. And when this is enhanced, those enemies damaged by Hurricane will be slowed by 25% for 2 seconds. And finally, with Natural Hurricane, Hurricane dealing damage has a 15% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. We have several passives here that we're taking. The first is Elemental Exposure, and this means that you have a lucky hit chance to have your storm damage trigger vulnerability to enemies for 1 second. We then take Charged Atmosphere, which is going to cause lightning to strike down on enemies every 18 seconds. This was one of the options I was considering maybe putting 3 points in. This is kind of a flex skill at this point though. We'll see about that. And lastly, more importantly maybe, is Bad Omen. And again, this is a lucky hit which is going to cause up to a 30% chance when dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy or immobilized or stunned enemy that they have a lightning strike that deals bonus damage to them. So really with Bad Omen, this is where we're really starting to ramp up our damage against vulnerable enemies. And then for our ultimate skill, we're going to be taking Cataclysm, which is another storm that is summoned around the druid for 8 seconds, summoning tornadoes, which knock back enemies. They don't deal damage, but there are lightning strikes that will be called down, which do deal damage to your enemies. When this is enhanced, it increases the duration of Cataclysm by 2 seconds, making it last for 10 seconds total. And then with Supreme Cataclysm, lightning strikes from Cataclysm make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. So that's a 100% chance to make enemies hit by lightning strikes vulnerable for 2 seconds. And then finally for our capstone, we have Perfect Storm. This is going to cause your storm skills to grant additional spirit, which is nice to have, and deal extra damage when damaging vulnerable, immobilized, or slowed enemies. So really with Perfect Storm, this is where the build fully comes together. So you might not be able to fully utilize this build inside of the beta, but that's just something to consider. For the Codex of Power, I think that we would look to take Hurricane damage is increased by 7% for each second it's active. Overcharged Aspect might be another option. This is going to cause there to be chances to overcharge enemies, which is going to cause them to pulse damage around them. And then for our Paragon board, we're going to be taking Thunderstruck. This is going to cause your storm skills to deal an increased critical strike damage against vulnerable or immobilized enemies. And then for the class mechanic, again, we're probably not going to have access to this in the beta, but I still kind of want to give a little bit of an overview just to give the full extent of this build. For the deer spirit animal, we're going to be taking Gift of the Stag, which is going to increase our maximum spirit. For eagle, we would look to take critical strike chance. This is going to just increase our critical damage against those vulnerable targets, especially if we're taking Thunderstruck. And then for snake, we would look to take Overload. This is going to cause lightning damage to have a chance to deal or apply a static discharge to enemies, causing them to pulse damage around them. We could also maybe take Calm Before the Storm. I think this is an option for our 5th power that we would get access to. This would cause your nature magic skills to have a 50% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill. But when I read nature damage, I'm not sure if that actually means storm skills or your electric skills. I assume it does, but I'm not entirely sure. For wolf, there are 2 options here as well. The first is synergize, which is going to have a lucky chance whenever you deal damage to restore 10 spirit. So that's nice because we'll be hitting a lot of enemies around us with our lightning storm and hurricane and cataclysm. But also calamity increases the duration of your ultimate skills by 25%. So if we take calamity, that's going to cause our cataclysm to last 12.5 seconds. But as you can probably see with this build, it really focuses on applying vulnerability and then enhancing the damage that you do to those vulnerable targets. So I think this build would probably want to focus on vulnerability damage and critical strike chance. Getting into our second build, we have what I'm calling the Earth Warden. This is a build that focuses on the Werebear, and it's going to utilize a legendary effect which causes Pulverize to be considered an Earth skill. This has additional interactions later on which synergize with being fortified, making this a very tanky build. For our basic attack, we'll be taking Maul. This is just going to do a little bit of damage in front of you. But when this is enhanced, it's going to fortify you, giving you a little bit of your shield. And then finally with Wild Maul, there's a 15% chance when you damage an enemy to knock them down for 2 seconds. If the range on Maul is just absolutely atrocious, I think taking Fierce Maul will be very helpful to increase the range and radius of Maul. But moving into our spirit skills, we have Pulverize. This is going to be our primary damage and what our legendary kind of revolves around. This causes the Werebear to slam the ground, dealing damage to surrounding enemies. When this is enhanced, your next Pulverize will overpower every so many seconds while you remain healthy. So this means that while you're above 80% health, your skills will overpower, dealing bonus damage, and that damage is pretty chunky. And finally, enemies are stunned for a certain amount of seconds whenever they are overpowered with Pulverize. Moving into our defensives, we are taking 2 of them here. The first is going to be Earthen Bulwark. This is going to again cause you to generate a shield around you for a few seconds. When this is enhanced, it makes you unstoppable, so you're immune to CC. But in this case, we're going to be taking the innate Earthen Bulwark, and this is going to cause rock shrapnel to fly outward whenever Earthen Bulwark is destroyed or expires. This damage is increased based off of the remaining barrier amount. So really, I think this skill is going to kind of depend on what gets consumed first between the earth and bulwark barrier or your fortified shields. If fortified shields get consumed first, then I think being able to deal 300% of this earth and bulwark damage in an area around it is going to deal some pretty nutty burst. The other defensive we're taking is Debilitating Roar. This causes you to reduce enemies' damage around you by 50% for 4 seconds. But when this is enhanced, it also fortifies the werebear for 8.8% of your base life. And finally, with Preserving Debilitating Roar, this will also heal you for 4% of your maximum life for each second of its duration. And then for our companions, we would be taking wolves here. This is just 1 point in it for now. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth investing more heavily into, but for now, just 1 point. And with wolves, they will just passively deal a little bit of damage to enemies around you, but when you activate it, they will start focusing an enemy and striking them for additional damage. When the wolves are enhanced, they will begin dealing additional damage to immobilized, stunned, slowed, or poisoned enemies. So there could be a little bit of synergy here with the stun effect from Pulverize. Finally, Ferocious Wolfpack will make your wolves have a lucky hit effect, which will cause you to fortify for a little bit of your health whenever they deal damage. And then we move into our Wrath skills, and we'll be taking Trample here. This is going to cause the werebear to charge forward, dealing damage and knocking enemies back. The enemies who are knocked into terrain take additional damage and are stunned for 3 seconds. When this is enhanced, Trample is going to deal increased damage, but that damage falls off for each enemy hit after the first. And then finally with Savage Trample, this is going to cause Trample to generate 20 spirit. There are a few passes we'll look to take here. The first is Crushing Earth, and this makes it so that your Earth skills deal 15% increased damage to slowed, stunned, immobilized, or knocked back enemies. But then we'll also be taking Stone Guard, which is while you have Fortify for over 50% of your maximum health, your Earth skills deal 12% increased damage. And then finally with Safeguard, this is kind of just a filler skill for now, or filler passive. This makes critical strikes with Earth skills fortify you for a percentage of your base life. And then moving into our ultimates, we're going to be taking Grizzly Rage, of course. This causes you to shift into a dire werebear form for 10 seconds, gaining increased damage and damage reduction. And you also gain a stacking damage bonus the longer you're in this form. And kills also extend the duration of Grizzly Rage by 1 second up to an additional 10 seconds, meaning this will last for 20 seconds. When Grizzly Rage is enhanced, you become unstoppable while Grizzly Rage is active. And then finally, while Grizzly Rage is active, if you take Supreme Grizzly Rage, this will cause you to fortify for every second that Grizzly Rage is active. And then finally for our capstone, we will be taking Earth and Might, and this has a lucky hit effect which causes enemies damage with Earth skills have up to a 5% chance to restore all of your spirit, cause your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 10 seconds. But then there's also some weird text here. I'm not entirely sure how this reads, but it says the chances increase by 10% for critical strikes, 100% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So I'm not sure if that implies that if an enemy is stunned, it's a 100% chance to trigger this effect. But if that's the case, I think this build could be pretty insane. For the Codex of Power, this is kind of what I was talking about, which causes Pulverize to be our primary skill. With Aspect of the Earth Sign Horror, Pulverize is now considered an Earth skill, and after casting Pulverize, Tectonic Spikes continue to deal damage over 2 seconds. This combined with our capstone, if the interaction is what I think it would be, is going to be pretty insane for that persistent area of effect damage with both Pulverize and spawning these Tectonic Spikes. For the Paragon board, we will be taking Survival Instincts. This makes it so that while you're in werebear form, you deal increased damage up to a cap for every percentage difference in current life between you and the enemies that you're hitting. So this would mean that assuming you have a bunch of Fortify, you're sitting at 100% life. As you hit enemies, they're going to drop in life, increasing your damage to them up to a certain cap, of course, but still, I think that Survival Instincts would make for some pretty decent damage. And then finally for the Spirit Boons, we would be taking Prickle Skin. This is going to give us some Thorns, which is going to increase our passive damage. We would then take Swooping Attacks. I think the idea behind this attack speed buff is that we would get out more mauls, which is going to mean that we fortify for more. For Snake, we're going to be taking Obsidian Slam. This will make it so that every so many kills will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. So this means that your Pulverize will overpower more often, meaning that you get to stun enemies more often. And then finally for Wolf, we would be taking Calamity, which is going to extend the duration of Grizzly Rage by 25%. For the final build on this list, this is a werewolf form I'm calling Leader of the Pack, and this build is very, very experimental. and it's focused on buffing your companions for the majority of your damage. This build also focuses on physical critical strikes instead of dealing poison damage that the other werewolf build focuses on. For our basic attack, we're going to be taking Claw, which deals a little bit of damage, but when this is enhanced, it increases the Claw attack speed by 10%. But finally, and most importantly, with Fierce Claw, Claw applies a little bit of poison damage over 3 seconds. We're taking this poison damage here just to apply or synergize with one of our later companion skills. For our spirit skills, we're going to be taking Shred. This is a 3-attack combo, which deals increasing damage, and the 3rd attack is going to deal a large portion of the damage. When this is enhanced, Shred is going to increase in attack speed, and it's also going to heal you if an enemy is struck. And finally, for Primal Shred, Shred's 2nd and 3rd attacks also perform a dash. In addition, Shred's critical strike damage is increased. We also take Predatory Instinct here, which is a passive effect that increases our critical strike chance against close enemies. For our defensives, we're going to be taking Blood Howl. This is also going to synergize with the legendary effect that we need to take to enhance our companions. Blood Howl is going to heal you for 20% of your maximum at its base effect, but when this is enhanced, it's going to cause Blood Howl to reduce in cooldown for every kill. But finally, Preserving Blood Howl is going to cause you to increase your attack speed by 15% for 4 seconds. Very quickly, I just want to go over that legendary effect. Night Howler's aspect makes it so that Blood Howl increases your critical strike chance by 5%. In addition, it now also affects your companions and players for 3 seconds. So let's talk about our companions here. First, we're going to be taking the wolves. I kind of went over this with the bear section, but this is going to summon 2 wolves that deal a little bit of damage to enemies randomly. But when you activate this, this causes the 2 wolves to focus one single target, dealing additional damage. The wolves can then be enhanced to deal increased damage to immobilized, stunned, slowed, or poisoned enemies. Brutal Wolf Pack, when you critically strike, your wolves gain increased attack speed for so many seconds. For our second companion, we'll be taking Ravens. I'm not sure if this actually works the way I'm imagining it, but you can have both wolf companions and ravens out, and when you use Blood Howl, it's going to increase the damage of both ravens and wolves. But when we talent into ravens further, it increases the critical strike chance for 5 seconds against enemies who are hit by your ravens. And then with brutal ravens, this causes 2 additional ravens to periodically attack enemies, applying that critical buff to more enemies. For our wrath skills, we're actually not taking any of them. I know I could maybe take rabies, but again, this is a very janky, highly experimental build. So we're going to move off into our ultimate, and we would be taking Lacerate, which is again going to cause the werewolf form to become immune, dash for 10 seconds between enemies, dealing a lot of damage. And when that's enhanced, each time Lacerate deals a critical strike, you heal for a little bit of life. And then finally, Lacerate's initial strike is guaranteed a critical strike and deals 200% increased damage. For our capstone, every 6th werewolf skill will critically strike and deals 60% increased damage. This feels like the only real werewolf capstone that synergizes. I don't think it's really going to be that strong, but I think it synergizes a little bit better than something like Bestial Rampage. For the Paragon board, there's not really a lot that synergizes with this build, unfortunately. So we would look to take Lust for Carnage, which is going to cause critical strikes with werewolf skills to restore a little bit of spirit. For our spirit boons, for the deer, we would be taking Gift of the Stag, which is going to increase our maximum spirit. For eagle, we would be taking critical strike chance or even Avian Wrath to increase our critical strike damage. For snake, we would be taking Masochistic. This is going to cause critical strikes with shape-shifting skills to heal you for a little bit of health. And then finally, with wolf, we would be taking Pack Leader. This is going to make it so that critical strikes have up to a 20% chance to reset the cooldowns of your companion skills. So really, I think Wolf Pack Leader is kind of what enables this build a little bit more, because it's going to let your wolves and your ravens deal a lot more damage. That's going to wrap up the Druid sample builds that I wanted to go over. Do any of these sound like a build that you might want to try out? Let me know in the comments which one sounds the most interesting. Personally, I think I'm most excited for either the Storm Druid or maybe more recently this Werebear build, the Earthen Warden. I think just being able to absorb so much damage while dishing out a bunch of AoE sounds really, really cool. As always, this was Goober Troy saying thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.